Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to our tutorial for the FSReborn Embraer Phenom 300. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you all around the aircraft and its normal operational procedures and give you some tips and tricks for the G3000. Now, we are in Dreamflight's absolutely fantastic Teterboro V2 at the Signature Aviation Terminal, and we are just about to make our way out to our Phenom. Now, starting with a couple of basics over here. The airplane is in a normal cold and dark shape, and we are going to go over the entirety of the procedures. Now, some things may be changing when the aircraft is updated, since currently the airplane is provided in an all switches off configuration when loaded in the cold and dark panel state. However, the securing the aircraft procedure does not actually instruct to turn all the switches off, so you might find it with a couple switches in a different configuration after the aircraft receives a future update. But for now, let's go inside and let's get started. So, standard cold and dark, nothing done. The first thing that we should do when getting on board our aircraft is to check the airplane's general conditions, the maintenance status and so on. And we do that down here in the electronic flight bag. You can see on the pre-flight screen it shows us the status and some operational information for all of our aircraft systems. If you've set all the maintenance stuff on in the realism panel of your electronic flight bag, then you want to pay especially close attention to all the stuff over here. Generally, it's going to tell you if everything is okay, but you want to have a quick look over the maintenance pages as well, where you can check on the status of a lot of different systems. And on the left side you can see the regular maintenance intervals. For example, over here we're on the engine management page, and it tells you how often you need to do oil changes and so on, and you got to keep track of all of that down here. So just go over all the different systems and check for everything being okay if you are using all the realism functions. Now, apart from the realism functions, the only thing we need to do in our settings page is to fill in your SimBrief username, and down here you also have an option to send the SimBrief flight plan to the G3000, and whether you want to use Navigraph charts or whether you want to use the standard Lido charts. Now, for a business jet, Navigraph charts, if you have them, since they are a third-party service, are a little more recommendable, since Navigraph covers more smaller airports, and since in the real world Jeppesen is more widespread than Lido is among private jet operators. Now, with that in mind, let's go right back into our pre-flight procedures, starting with a walk around, because there are a couple things that you want to take care of. So let's go back outside and have a quick look around our aircraft, as you should always do when you are coming to the plane. Now, what I want to talk about in particular is all the covers that we have on the plane over here. So first things first, we want to remove the pitot covers. Those protect the sensors from any insects or anything that may block them that could cause erroneous flight instruments reading. Yes, that is simulated. Now, the next thing that you want to take care of is the landing gear pin. And this one is especially important, because if that one's not pulled, then your landing gears are not going to retract after takeoff. And that is a common thing that I've already seen in the comments underneath my videos and in my Discord. That's happening to people flying the Embraer. So make sure that that one down here is removed as well. Very, very important. Now from there we can continue our walk around. Make sure that there are no covers over here. We'll get to the fuel panel later on. That's located down here, can be operated fully, but we will get to that. Then we can remove our chocks, for which you've got to get rather close. Then we're moving all the way around the aircraft, checking for its general condition, And then we're getting to the engine, and on the engine as well, we want to remove the covers. Now, don't try to start the engine with the cover attached. It is not going to go well, especially if you've got failures activated. Now, that's been 4 things that we did during the walk around over here. Number 1, the pitot covers. Number 2, the landing gear pin. Number 3, the chocks. And number 4, the engine covers. You want to make sure that you got all of them. Forget one and it will have consequences in this airplane. Now, that's our external walk around basically completed. So let's go ahead and get right into the cockpit setup. Now, cockpit setup, we are going to start by making sure that all our switches are in the correct positions. So for that, let's go ahead and start by following a standard scan sequence, starting at the bottom over here, going over all the panels to the side, and then down here to the bottom. Now, starting on the left hand side, we got the IFE refreshment controller. This is basically your in-flight entertainment and the controller of the fridge. So that one's off for the time being. The flight control reset switch is a normal. The oxygen passenger or the oxygen controller is on passenger automatic, and the cutout valve has to be pushed in. So make sure that that one is down. Then we got our oxygen mask, which is properly stowed. The test is currently not simulated, unfortunately, so I cannot show you that one. Moving up to the electrical panel, the batteries are off. The emergency switch is guarded, the bus tie is in auto, and the generators can already be switched into the auto position. Then we're moving up to the pneumatic panel, where we are also going to turn the bleeds into auto, and the cross bleed is verified in auto as well. The test panel is switched off, and then we're moving up. You can hide the yoke by clicking the switch in the middle over here, and we get to the left side panel. The fuel pumps are going to go into auto, the fuel trough feed is off. The hydraulic pump shut-off valves are both open, the ELT's in the middle, armed position, and the science and outlet switch is going to go into the middle position as well. A small comment on this switch down here. You've got 3 possible positions. The left one shows you the seatbelt sign, the right one is the power outlet, so basically the USB charger. So what you want is on and on, so that you have your seatbelt signs on, and the chargers are operative, making your passengers a little happier. The stick pusher cutout switch is out, and then we're moving over to the right hand side where we got the heaters. Now you got the windshield heat, and then you got your probe heat, which we are already gonna switch into the auto position. The ice protection switches are off for the engine anti-ice, and the wing stabilizer anti-ice is off as well. Landing gear lever is down, and then we're moving over to the right hand side. Again, you can hide the yoke over here. The pressurization mode selector is going to go into the automatic position. The ECS controller is going to go into both. This is important. If you forget this one, then your airplane is not going to pressurize, and there is no warning associated with forgetting this switch. You're not going to notice until you eventually run into cabin pressurization problems. So this one is important. Don't ask me how I know. Alright, the fan switches are going to stay in the low position for the time being, and the temperature controller can go somewhere into the 12 o'clock position. Got to be a little careful with all of those for as long as you do not have the engines running, because you can easily overload the electrical system of the Phenom. Then we got the air conditioning mode selector, which we switch into the auto position, and the temperature controller is in the middle switch, but that one's only relevant in manual operation. Moving over then to the right hand side, over there we just checked that the oxygen mask is in a good condition. Now we can already move down to the center panel where we got our trims. That's the yaw trim, so the rudder trim. The roll is the aileron trim. The mode selector is off. This is only the backup pitch trim, so this is off. And the backup pitch trim switch is in the neutral position. The display mode selector is set both to auto. And then moving further down, the flaps are in the up position, thrust levers are in idle, your speed brake is in close, which basically means that the speed brakes are retracted, parking brake set, And then on the engines panel, we got the engine start-stop switches, which are in the stop position. The ignition switches are in auto, and the fire extinguisher bottle is off, and the shut-off switches are guarded. Finally, we are looking down here where we have the alternate gear extension, which has its door closed and the fire extinguisher is in place. Last but not least, we are moving up to the overhead panel. And over here, we basically just got our lights. So we make sure that the taxi and landing lights are off, the nav light switch can already come on, the strobes are off, the inspection light is off. The cockpit panel lights are basically set as needed, so for anything you can basically turn it full bright. At night you might want to turn it a little bit further down. The cabin passenger control basically controls the brightness of the floodlights in the passenger cabin, so use that as needed. Basically many operators will just keep it on max all the time. And then you have the emergency lights, which you can arm as soon as electrical power is turned on, otherwise these may drain the battery, so recommendation is to keep them off until electrical power is applied. Now, this basically concludes the initial setup of our cockpit. Let's now go ahead and go into the electronic flight bag and down onto the ground operations screen. Now, over here we have the ability to connect a ground power unit, which I would recommend to do because the Phenom is a rather power-hungry aircraft. So let's go ahead and place the GPU in play, and then we can also connect it down here. Now, with all of that done, we can go ahead and start powering the aircraft up. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our power up. And the first thing we are going to do is to run down here, turn on the batteries. Battery 1 and 2. This brings the aircraft to life. When an external power unit is connected, you will see the avail light down here. So press that in order to get the GPU connected. Now that we have electrical power applied to the aircraft, our G3000 is powering up, and we gotta press the rightmost soft key to go into the menus down here as well. Now let's take a moment to talk about the G3000 and its different systems. The G3000 is basically the brain and the heart of the Phenom. It gives you full control over pretty much any aircraft system and consists of 3 main screens, where the left and right are usually used as primary flight displays and the middle screen as multifunction display. And then you have the 2 GTCs, the touch controllers. These give you basically control over everything that's happening up here. So by default they will open on the initialization page, which is going to completely guide you through the entire setup of the G3000. So once all of that is done, you don't need to do anything more. But before we get started with this, I want to give you a little tour of the general functions of the G3000 that you may want to use to configure your airplane. This is especially important because this is a persistent system. Once you've used it on one airplane, for example the default TBM 930, it's going to remember a lot of settings and will also pull those up on the Phenom then. So in order to give you a general idea and general configuration options, let me give you a small tour. With your home button down here, you get to the main overview. Many functions or many keys have 2 functions. For example, if a map is already selected, like over here, then a second push is going to get you into the map settings. The same also applies, for example, to the weather radar, to the terrain awareness system, and so on. Now, each controller can control every single one of those available screens. The controller or the screen that is controlled is shown to you by the color that you have around the window. Blue is the left GTC, purple is the right GTC. So for example, right now we can see that we're controlling this window over here. If we wanted to control the left window, then we got the button on the lower left, and you can see you got arrows over here when you move the mouse a little bit out. Now press that arrow and you can see now the left map is highlighted in blue. Now we're controlling the left map with the GTC. Now you can also control units on the left with the right GTC like that. So always know which GTC is controlling which panel on your instrument screens, because you cannot double control one window. So if the left one is selected right now, and we're now moving that knob over to the right, you can see it's skipping that one that's already controlled by the other unit. So now we'd be controlling that side. This can be a little confusing at first, so always have a good idea of what you are doing down there, and always be sure that the GTCs are selected appropriately. Now, this is just a general little introduction on how to control those displays. The primary flight displays, or the left and right display screens, can be split so that you have a map over there, or that you do not have a map. This can be done by going into the PFD settings and then taking the PFD mode, which is set to split right now. You can set this to full, and then you have a full PFD screen where you can, for example, activate a traffic inset or other things that we're going to talk about in flight. Now, I do recommend for ground operations to go into the PFD settings and keep this on the split screen so that you have an additional screen available over here. Alright, now this is general controls of your G3000 unit. Now let's go ahead and select that right unit back to the right hand side, and now we can put the cursor back on the middle display over here. Now you can turn these maps in a full screen mode if the selected system page supports it. What do I mean with that? Right now we're on a map, and the map can be shown in full screen, so you have the full button down here. You can click that, and now you can see you got a full screen map on your multifunction display. Likewise, you can turn it down to a half screen map if you want to. This function is not available on all pages. For example, if you go into the aircraft systems and select the status page, you can see this one does not have a full screen option. So down here the option is now disappearing. Going back onto the home screen, there are a couple of setups that you want to do when you're using the G3000 for the first time. For those, you go in Utilities, and then down here you have the Setup key. Go to Avionics Settings, and then you can change a couple of things. For example, the flight director format can be changed between the single queue flight director that we have here, or the dual queue flight director that you may be more used to from flying your average airliner. Personally, I prefer the single queue on private jets, but this is totally up to you. And just like that, you can change a lot of things down here. One thing, however, that is especially important for Europeans is to take the COM channel spacing and put that one to 8.33 kHz. Otherwise, you will not be able to select a lot of ATC frequencies that are commonly used everywhere in the world except for the United States of America. So this one is an especially important setting. Apart from that, you can also change your units down here. For example, you can choose between feet or meters. May be useful when flying in Chinese airspace. And then you can select a lot of different things down here that are useful to get your head around, but not essential for the tutorial. Now, with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and go back to the home screen, and let's start going over our FMS setup. Now, the FMS setup is fairly easy, but before we do anything down here, let's go into the electronic flight bag and import our flight plan from SimBrief. We do this down on the flight plan page, import from SimBrief, and this is going to give you your operational flight plan. You got the departure and arrival, weather and NOTAMs. Then you have a general weather page where you can also request the META from pretty much any airport. And then we got the OFP report, which basically is your SimRief flight plan. Pretty useful stuff, especially because you got your fuel figures and so on. Once that is done, you can go onto the ground ops page and you can see that this has automatically set our payload and our fuel figures. Now, we want to fly with a co-pilot today. The Phenom is certified for single pilot operation, but in commercial you normally have a first officer as well. And now there are two options for what you can do. You can either load that stuff instantly, or you can load it in real time. Now, when you load it in real time, a fuel truck is going to appear and you have to manually operate the fuel panel if you so desire in the settings. I would absolutely recommend doing that. For the tutorial, let's just increase the target fuel a little bit, and we are just going to use the load instant page. So now all our passengers are on board. You can see our first officer has arrived and our passengers have arrived back here as well. Now, with that done, let's start with the FMS setup. So if you've clicked yourself out of the initialization page, then you can quickly get back into it by going to Utilities and then Initialization. And from here, we're simply going to go all the way top to bottom and enter everything that we need. So we start at the very top with a voice and data recorder tests, and whenever a field has these three dashes, click on it, and then the test is automatically going to run. And as we can see, the CBR test is done. Now let's click next and go on to the system tests, where we are going to start with a terrain awareness test, which is now in progress. And note that this one is only going to work after the FMS position has already aligned. That happens automatically, but while you get the error messages that the position has not been found yet,
system test. Okay.
If you run the test while the system positions haven't been found yet, then the test may fail. Next up, we are going to do the traffic test. You can see the traffic warning over here.
Traffic system test passed.
Fantastic. Now let's press next. And now we got the engine thrust rating. Now this one is an interesting function. You are going to go on the set data, then you press the OAT button. And over here you simply re-enter the outside air temperature. You can take it from down here, or you take it from the ATIS, which is sometimes a bit more recommendable, because the temperatures down here can be wrong when the sun is shining onto the sensors. So just enter the temperature over there, press enter, and then press send data. This is basically used by the FADEC in order to calculate the automatic thrust reserve. Automatic thrust reserve is what you get when you move the thrust lever to the maximum position, or when an engine fails, or when there is a difference of more than 20% between the two N1s. When that happens, it's basically going to move the remaining engine to the absolute maximum thrust, which is a little nice safety function. Now once data accepted shows down here, we can press init again, which is going to lead us to the next page, which is the flight plan. Now this can be imported automatically when selected in the electronic flight bag, or you can do a manual flight plan uplink, which you can find when you go onto the home page, and then down here on the SimRief page. You click on there, and then you can request your latest SimRief flight plan up here, and when you hit that button again after you requested it, then it is going to insert the flight plan. Now, I like the option that it automatically populates it, so we are going to select just that. Now, let's go ahead and enter our departure and our arrivals. So we are going to hit Procedure, Departure, and now we basically select whatever we need. If you want some charts, there are several options to get them. You got a chart function over here, where you can simply select what you need, or you can show your charts up here on the main screens. That's totally up to you what you want to use. I am going to get a basic set of charts up here. So ground chart, we are gonna pin that one, and then we want the departure charts as well, and we are going to take the Teterboro for departure today, and we are going to pin that one as well. When charts are pinned, you can go right back, and then you'll find them down here on the main screen. Now, The wind is calm and we are parked down here. If you want your charts to center on the airplane, you got that lovely function down here that it locks the position right on your airplane's position. Very useful thing that is only available in the electronic flight bag, not in the G3000. However, if you would like an actual moving map, then you can always go to the en route chart, zoom all the way in. This is Navigraph only, this is not available without Navigraph. And when you're zoomed all the way in, then you are getting your live taxi chart. Really useful stuff. For now, let's go back to route and let's go back to the airport overview. Now, runway 06 is going to be our departure runway today, and we'll fly the Teterboro 4 departure, which, as we can see down here, from runway 6 is basically interceptor 040 heading, and then at 2.3 dm Teterboro is a left-hand turn heading 280. So let's go down here and make sure that we go onto departure, Teterboro 4, runway 6, and now all of that stuff is selected. Now something that I would absolutely recommend you to do is that you go onto the preview page and first of all show that thing on the map, because that way it shows you the entire SID on your nav display. You can also put that into the full screen, which is really useful to cross-check that the stuff that you're loading into your FMS is actually correct. Next, you can go on to preview again, then show on chart, and then it's automatically going to pull the departure chart up for you. So pretty useful stuff. If you're flying an RNAV departure, so one with a lot of waypoints on it, then you can also immediately compare it with a chart and the sequence of waypoints that you're going to insert. So remember, we said that we are flying straight ahead to 2.3 dm Teterboro and then a left turn heading 280. Well, down here we can check this. Straight ahead, 2.3 Teterboro, and then manual sequence always means that there's a radar vector involved. When you verify that, click on load, and you can see that now you got the full SID available down here as well. And we can once again see we go straight ahead to 410, then heading 040 to 2.3 dm Teterboro with a 2000 foot restriction, and then we got a manual heading 280 sequence, and that's the end of our SID. So that's some very useful stuff that's available down there. Let's also go ahead and insert the arrival. So let's go on to procedures and over here into our flight plan, where we got the Qatar 5 arrival in Montreal, runway 24 right in use. So let's go on to arrival, select the Qatar 5. We are arriving from Peterborough today. So let's select the Peterborough transition. We are going to land on runway 24 right according to the plan. So let's select that. And now over here we can do the very same thing again. Preview the arrival, show on the map. Again, very useful stuff. And then you can also compare that with the chart straight away. And you can go over all that stuff if you so desire. Now, if you want to control your charts, you can do that using the knob on the left side there. You can scroll on it to zoom. You can click on it to get the touchpad. And that one allows you to move your view of the chart around. Click on the middle of that button again to remove the touchpad, and that way you can basically confirm that everything that's getting inserted over here is correct. Once you've confirmed all of that, press the load button, and now we've loaded the star into our FMS. Finally, let's go into procedures again and also load the approach, which is going to be an ILS approach runway 24 right with a radar vector sequence, and over here you could again confirm that, show on the map today, and that's what the approach looks like, and that's what the missed approach looks like. Fantastic. And now, very important, only press load, do not press load and activate. When you do that, your entire route all the way to the start of the approach is going to be deleted because the system thinks that the approach is active already. So only press load. Alright, now it tells us not approved for GPS, guidance is for monitoring only, load approach, yes. Because obviously this is an ILS approach, so it's flown based on the ILS signal, not based on your GPS. When that is done, so when we've loaded the entire SID, star and approach, then we can continue on the VNAV page. Over here we got a couple of things to take care of. First of all, VNAV is enabled, And down here we want to ensure that we are on FMS speed. You can change this manually to command a certain speed that you may want to fly, but make sure that FMS is selected down here, otherwise VNAV is not going to follow the FMS targets. Next, let's go onto the climb page. Over here we can change the different climb speed schedules that our VNAV is going to command. So first of all, let's start on climb schedule at the top. You got two different schedules available. You got an economy schedule, which is 225 knots and on transition Mach 0.6. And then you got the high speed schedule, which is 250 knots and on transition Mach 0.65. You can also enter a pilot defined climb where you can enter any airspeed combination that you would like. For example, if you're flying on a very busy VATSIM events with a lot of airliners that are flying faster than you, then you may want to enter something like 290 knots and Mach 0.7, just so that you don't become the airway brake for everyone behind you. So those are the options available. I'm going to go with the 250 knots and Mach 0.65 climb because that's a good compromise between being fast and being efficient. The transition altitude is automatically pulled from the database associated with the departure that you have selected, so this should by default be correct for the country in question. Then you got a general airspeed limit based on your altitude. By default, that's 250 knots below 10,000 over here, but if you're departing, for example, through airspace where VFR traffic may be encountered, which is something that happens a lot in a business jet, then you may enter something slower, like, for example, 200 knots until 10,000. So, totally up to you. You can enter anything down there. By default, 250 below 10,000. Lastly, you have a terminal area speed limit, which is just an additional way of entering a speed constraint so that you don't fly too fast too early. So over here you can enter anything you like. The default is 210 knots below 2,500 feet within 4 miles of your departure airport. You may use that, or you can just, return that to the speed that you may want to fly anyway. So for example, we could enter 250 over here, and then, then you would accelerate to 250 knots straight away. That's up to you, but know that this exists and it can be useful. For example, if there's VFR traffic around or if there are tight turns on the departure, that's where you may use this. Lastly, we got the cruise page, and this is where you enter the cruise speed schedule. By default, 310 knots, Mach 0.78 is a good speed for the Phenom, which also makes this a really fast aircraft. Now, when all of that stuff is selected, we can go back down here out of the VNAV page, and with that we have basically entered our flight plan. So let's press next, and this is going to lead us to the landing field elevation, which we are going to keep on automatic so that it pulls the landing field elevation from the database. Let's press next again, and this brings us to the weight and balance. You can see it also opens the weight and balance graph up here on the multifunction display. So the empty weight data is basically coming from the airplane's weight and balance report, is entered automatically. But what we want to care of is the aircraft loading. Now over here you can enter everything manually, or after you've loaded your airplane through the electronic flight bag, which is why I started this section that way, you can scroll this all the way to the bottom, and down there you got a little cheat sheet, import from MSFS, click that, and now you can see that it's loaded your weights automatically like that. So when your weights are entered, we're going to go onto the fuel page, and over here there are a couple things we need to do. First of all, only do this after you've refueled the aircraft. Again, that's the reason why we started on the weight and balance before going into the FMS. So press fuel on board synchronize. That basically confirms the fuel on board from the fuel quantity measuring system. Next we're going to enter the taxi out fuel, which you can find on your flight plan. So for today's flight, that's 120 pounds. So we're going to select 120 over here, hit enter. And then we got the fuel reserves. Now there's two things that you can set down there. One of them is the fuel reserves, the other one is the holding time. Now, what I recommend for the fuel reserves is you take the final reserve down here. But that means you got nothing for your alternate fuel. You can also put final reserve plus alternate in there, so that's 1020 for us today. And indeed, that's what I'm going to do. So let's enter 1020, enter, and here we go. So with that, we've entered our weight and balance, and now you can see that the entire envelope is within the certified envelope of the aircraft. Alright, and with that we can hit next, which brings us to our takeoff data calculation. So, we got the origin, which is loaded from our flight plan, Teterboro runway 06. The takeoff weight comes from the weight and balance, and so does the center of gravity over there. Next we can go into weather, and over here we have the ability to show us the departure airfield meter that comes from the simulator. So click on that, and over here we got the entire weather. So let's go back, and then you can simply click load meter wind, and that's automatically going to load the entire weather. Note that the synchronize barrel pressure button over there is going to synchronize whatever you've set over here, so that way we could possibly put an incorrect figure in if we haven't set the primary flight display up yet. Alright, so just load meter wind, that loads whatever you've got. Next up we got the runway. And this is pretty useful because you can change the takeoff run available if you want to calculate an intersection departure. By default, if you take the full runway, no need to change anything over here. Then we got the takeoff configuration. By default, we use flaps 1. We do not need anti-ice today. If we did, we would have to enter it over here. And runway alignment is how many feet of runway you expect to use to align yourself with your departure runway. I'm going to leave this on 0 today, but entering something like 100 or 200 feet when you have an acute angle of lining up on your runway may be something to do. Finally, let's go to takeoff data, and you will see that with everything else filled out over here, it's automatically calculating the takeoff data for you. Hit accept takeoff speeds, and that is going to transfer those speeds up here to your primary flight display so that you have them available during your takeoff run. This page also delivers a lot of useful information, such as your takeoff N1, your takeoff trim setting, the one engine in operative climb gradient that you can achieve, and the field length required. So going down here, we have available 6,007 feet of runway, and we need 2,730 feet of runway. Takeoff weight down here, then you got the headwind and the crosswind, so we know that we got a left wind at 2 knots today, and the pressure altitude for your departure field. When that's done, hit next. And the last page that we're getting on is the speed box, which are automatically filled from the takeoff page. And over here, you could disable them on your PFD, but there is no reason to do so. So we are going to keep all of those. Finally, let's hit init, and this returns us to the initialization screen. And you can see that we have now filled out the entire initialization, so we can accept this down here, and that finishes our FMS pre-flight. Now the airplane is fully set up. Now, a couple more things that you can do down here. First of all, we got that top bar. This is where you can change your radios. You got the audio and radio button over here, where you can control the nav radios. And if you hit back, you're simply going to get back to the main screen. And then we got the comm frequencies. So when you click the top frequency, it changes the standby to the active. When you click the standby frequency, that's where you can enter a new frequency. So for example, right now I'm entering 122.8. Now there's two things you can do. Either just press enter, then it's just going to get into the standby frequency. Or if you enter something here and press transfer directly, then it's going to go active straight away. So for example down here, if we enter 1 to 1.5, we do that, hit transfer, and now it's active. The top button over here decides which frequency you transmit on, so which your microphone is adjusted to. Currently that's COM1, can change it for example to COM2 over here. And the bottom one controls which frequencies you monitor. So currently we're monitoring just the COM1, and now we're monitoring both. Lastly, you got the transponder mode over here, which by default is automatic, works very well, unless you're on VATSIM, where automatic turns your transponder mode Charlie off on the ground, which many controllers complain about. When that happens, You can change that over here. Just go to on or altitude reporting, and then it's going to turn your transponder on for the VATSIM controllers, which makes them happy. Not realistic that you have to go out of auto, because auto works very well in the real world, but in the simulation that may be happening to you when you're flying in VATSIM. Lastly, we got the squawk down here, and for default IFR flight we're going to use squawk 2000. Alright, so that is our setup. When you're done with everything, down here we can move up to the primary flight display, and lastly we will do the autopilot panel. But let's start on the primary flight display, because there's a couple of things we need to configure. First of all, we need the correct units for our QNH. So let's go to PFD settings, other PFD settings, altitude units. Down here you can switch between inches and hectopascals, and we're gonna select inches today. Over here you can also activate a meters overlay, which may be useful when flying in certain parts of Russia or in China. Now, with the correct QNH selected, let's put our QNH up, and in case you don't remember, performance, takeoff data, weather, show meta, this is where you get your QNH. So 3027 is our current altimeter setting. The knob is on the left, so let's go ahead and select that. Here we go, 3027, and then we can do the same thing on the right hand side, and you can see that the two units are not synced to one another, so you have to do the same setting on the other side as well, and then you can set it up over here, 3027. And finally, let's set 3027 on the standby as well. Note that the units over here are fixed, so you cannot change this unless you go into the EFB settings. Down there on the settings, you can switch your electronic instrument units between inches and hectopascals. Now, if you are flying, for example, between North America and South America, where hectopascals may be used, but your standby set at inches, then by switching the PFD to inches, you can easily find out what figure you have in inches. Now let's go back over here and talk about a couple more units. If you are using a conventional backup for your SID, turning the bearings on may be useful. You got nav, which is VOR 1 or 2. Then you can also set this to FMS, or you can set it to the ADF, or you can keep it off. Now, since we are flying a complete on-off departure today, we could just leave this on off. But if you want to back it up with the Teterboro VOR for the 2.3 mile point, then you could tune in Teterboro up here on the audio panel, down here, and then select your bearing appropriately. Now, you also have the attitude overlay, where you can activate syntactic terrain. This is useful when flying an IMC. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of it, so I'm gonna leave this off. But this is available if you want it. Well, and that's that setup. Now, what I'm going to do for today's departure is to have the large map available in the middle, the moving map, and then on the left I'll want my departure chart. So you can pre-select this by putting the cursor onto the left hand screen, then go on charts, and now you can have, for example, the airport chart, but we want the departure chart, Teterboro for departure. Then you could go to the controller like I've showed you earlier, zoom in, and then have your initial climb shown over there, or whatever else you may like. This is useful stuff that is available to you. Now, with that done, let's go ahead and set up the autopilot. So we want the heading on our runway heading, which is 060 today, the altitude selector onto the initial climb. Now this particular one has very low initial climb at 2,000 feet only. The Phenom climbs fantastically after takeoff. You're talking about 6,000 to 8,000 feet a minute. So let's just, for the purposes of the tutorial, select something high, like for example level 200. Now, you'll notice that you got no toga button up there, and when you turn the flight directors on, it just gives you roll hold and pitch hold. Toga buttons are located down here on the thrust levers. In the current version of the Phenom, without a click spot. So you may want to assign a click spot onto your joystick, which I've just pressed, so that I'm getting toga guidance on the flight director. Now, with that done, you could, for example, arm nav mode so that it engages after takeoff. Useful stuff. Alright, VNAV typically only used for descents. Just a little note to all the airline jockeys out of there. And with that, we have basically set up our autopilot and our display units. So let's go ahead and start going back to the lighting panel, where we can arm the emergency lights now that electrical power is available. And that's our whole flight deck setup complete. Now with the flight deck setup complete, let's go ahead and move into the checklists. So we do have full electronic checklists available in the Phenom. For that, simply click the checklist button down here, and that's going to pull up the checklist. Quick guidance over those checklists. You can see you got the normal checklist, then you got normal in icing conditions, then you have emergency checklist, smoke, non-enunciated abnormal checklists, such as, for example, abnormal landing gear extension. Then you got caution, which is anything that may show up down here in amber. And then you have advisory, which is, for example, right now GPU connected. So anything that shows down in white over there. And that way you can basically look any checklists up over there. Now we want to use the normal checklists today. The cockpit safety inspection is basically what we've done as the first part in the tutorial. That's why it loads on the before start. The same applies to Powerup, because that is done already. So that's why it starts on the before start checklist down there. Now let's go ahead and run that before start checklist. And note that these checklists are basically all read and do checklists. So you can see you've got a cursor up here, and you can control this using the lower right knob on the GTC. So you can scroll and you can click, which is gonna tick the things off. So let's start over here. Oxygen mask, flow and microphone checked. This is not simulated in the current version, but you would basically press the test button, then you press the emergency button and hold the test button for 5 seconds. And while you're doing that, you're checking for the oxygen pressure down here to not spike. Alright, so in order to tick it off, press the button in the middle. Then we got test panel, except for the store warning, protection and ice system. So test panel is located over here. So that's store warning and ice on the right hand side. And then enunciator, smoke detection and fire detection on the left hand side. Okay, so we're going to go to test. Then we start with the fire protection. So move the selector knob all the way to the left on the fire. And then press the start knob down here. Now you can see that's the fire warnings. Okay, so the fire protection is tested. Then we got the smoke detector, where we move the switch one further up to the smoke detection test. Press that one. And you can see we get the smoke warning. Then we have the enunciator test, which is up here. Press now that one. And now we should see 9 lights. So for example, we have the parking brake light on the left of the standby instrument there. We got the dump light down here and so on. That way we're checking for 9 lights, which should include something down here as well, which for some reason isn't lighting up. Down here, up here. It's basically testing all the enunciators. Alright, and that is done. Then we can return the test panel into the off position. Okay, next up we have fasten seatbelt signs, which, remember, are located down here, and we got them on. Then external lights as required, and for that, we basically just want the nav lights on. And at night you can also turn the inspection lights on. Landing taxi lights off and the strobe lights off. Alright, emergency light switch armed. That's over here, and that is armed. So, fuel quantity and balance. Up here we have 2,600 pounds, and those are balanced. And those are more than the minimum we need. Alright, oxygen pressure for dispatch, check. Now this one, you basically check that you got green oxygen over here. But if you want some more details, then you could, for example, use the right-hand GTC, go to Aircraft Systems and Status, and up here you also have a graphical representation of your oxygen, which currently is fairly far up in the greens, but it may be somewhere down here as well. So that way you can check that your oxygen pressure for dispatch requirements are matched. Okay, then we got thrust levers, which are in idle. Then we have the parking brake, which is set. Engine ignition switches down here are in auto. And last but not least, we got door closed, and that's the completion of the before start checklist. So let's go right back into the cabin and close that door, which you can do with a click spot that's located just over here on the side. And here we go. That's the door closed. Let's go right back over here and tick that thing off. And now we can see that the checklist is finished. It automatically marks the go to next checklist button, and by doing that it brings us right to the after start checklist. Okay, fantastic. So with that we have completed the before start checklist, and we can now go ahead and commence our engine start. Engine start in the Phenom is really easy. So the start sequence is going to be right engine and then the left engine, and starting on the right hand side is done because the GPU is connected on the left hand side. So let's go ahead and get started. We don't have a headset operator here, it's all done through hand signals. So as soon as the start clearance is received, we are simply going to turn the start stop knob onto the start position, and we use the strobe lights as a replacement of the beacon because the plane doesn't have a beacon. So strobe light on, and then we start the engine. The rest happens fully automatic, FADEC controlled, so there isn't all that much for us to do. And here we go. Easy. So engine 2 is started. When that's done, disconnect the ground power, remove the GPU so that nobody is endangered when we start the left-hand engine. And now that that is done, we can simply go ahead and start the left-hand engine. And you will notice that this increases the power on the right-hand engine so that sufficient power is available to start the left-hand engine. And once the left engine is started, the FADEC is going to return the right engine back into the idle position. Like that. Easy going. Very easy going. Note that depending on the outside conditions, you may be getting some bleed off warnings down here. That's totally expected, absolutely normal, nothing to worry about. And whenever something new comes up, it's going to flash the lower right of the PFD. Can disable the flash by clicking the button next to it. Okay, so let's run the after start checklist. So GPU, if applicable, disconnect. We've already removed it. Then elec emergency button, push in. That's down here. That's the guarded one. So we're going to push that one in. Now you can see that the battery voltage is changing. We wait until that stabilizes. And then we've got the battery 1 and 2 voltage check. Caution, each battery voltage must be at least 23.5 volts. And we can see that it is more than that. And then we are going to turn the elec emergency push button off and put the guard back down. Alright, next up we got the stall warning and protection panel, which we are going to test. So let's go stall warning and hit the start switch. Now we are meant to hear the stall 3 times, and thereafter the stick pusher should activate and push our control column forward. Now in the current version of the Phenom that I have, that's not simulated, but basically you should see this. Alright, then let's move to the ice protection test and run that as well. And we get the icing conditions over there. Good, then we can release the test and return the switch into the off position, and that's it. Now FCS control unit set is basically just another check that your autopilot is set up correctly, which it is today. Then we got engine takeoff data set. Remember that we set the OAT and the ATR during the pre-flight. At this point we just check that we still got the same temperature as we had submitted earlier through the GTC. If you need to change this figure, then you can always find it down here on Aircraft Systems, Engine Settings, and over here you can change it. Okay, so engine takeoff data is set. Landing field elevation, you can check that down here, and that's set according to what we've entered earlier. Is set. Takeoff speeds V1, VR, V2 and VFS are shown up here. Caution, set the speeds in sequence. If it is necessary to correct one of the speeds out of the sequence, all others must be verified. Okay, and that's done. Then speed selector knob, if applicable, that's located up here, and you can switch between manual and FMS mode. FMS is going to follow the speed schedule from the VNAV page, as well as any speed constraints that may be part of the SID, and manual, well, kind of self-explanatory, gives you manual speed control. So by default we want this in FMS. Okay, that is set. Then we got transponder set. For that we verify that the code is in, and the flight ID. Now the flight ID is currently not simulated, but that is where you would enter the call sign of the flight. Unfortunately I cannot show you that because it's currently not simulated. Now, for operations requiring ADS-B out, the transponder should be in alt mode. Again, that is what you could do over here, where you could switch that manually. For most operations, auto is going to do. Okay, so that's set. TCAS 2 is automatically controlled. We don't need to do that manually. Altimeters, verify and cross-check that the QNH is set on all 3 units. Then flight controls check free. So we got full up, full down, full left, and full right. So trims, normal and backup, check and set. So what we do over here is we want to set our takeoff trim setting, and we can do that or get access to that right down here on the takeoff data page. So we want a trim of 8.6 units. Trim indicator is down here on the bottom left of the MFD. And here we go. That's more or less 8.6, close enough. Okay, so the trims are set. Then flaps set for takeoff. Flap indicator is right down here. And the flaps are set for takeoff. External lights as required. Once again verify the nav light and the strobe light, and once you start taxiing we also turn the taxi light on. And eyes protection as required. For that, by default, we just have the ADS probes in auto, the rest off, and then use them as needed. So windshield heat when the windshields are fogging up, engine anti-ice when the SAT is 10 degrees or less, and wing stabilizer anti-ice as well. There is a whole chapter in the manual that I can recommend on the correct anti-ice usage. We might briefly talk about that later on in the climb. Alright, so ice protection as required. Now down here you do have some reminders for where your trim should be, depending on the center of gravity and the flap settings. Can use that or can skip that. We're gonna skip that today. So let's go all the way to the end of the checklist and press go to next checklist, which is going to be the before takeoff checklist. Alright, and with that we have finished this part of the setup. Let's return the cursor to the center panel, select the charts, airport chart, gonna go full screen down here, and now let's place this at a convenient setting, like this, for going to runway 06. Alright, and that concludes our engine startup and the associated procedures. So now let's go ahead and go into the taxi procedure. You'll find out that the airplane taxis very, very nicely. You need a bit of thrust to get moving, and then basically just idle thrust to keep moving. Let's turn on the taxi light, verify that the right side is clear and the left side is clear. Release the parking brake. And now, we just add a bit of thrust to get her to move. Check the brakes when we start moving. And here we go. Once you got speed, just return the engines in idle, and the plane is nicely maintaining that speed. Overall, very, very easy. Alright, now as we're taxiing to the runway, we can already commence the before takeoff checklist down to the line. That's takeoff configuration checked. For that, you got a button located down here. Press it.
Takeoff okay.
And that's it. Now, CAS messages check. For that, we have bleed 1 off. As mentioned, the bleed messages are totally expected in the Phenom on the ground, so that is checked. Fasten seatbelt signs on. Down here, fasten seatbelt sign are on. Yaw damper off. Yaw damper would be indicated over here and is off. And auto throttle if applicable. The current version of the Phenom doesn't have an auto throttle installed, but if it had one, check that it is disarmed. Now if you want to control the checklist, gotta return the cursor up there, and now we can tick all of those off until the shortly before takeoff indicator. Okay, and with that we have ticked off the checklist. Now we're at the holding point for runway 06. At this point I just gotta mention how awesome this airport looks like. Dreamflight Teterboro V2, highly recommendable private jet airport. Superb. Okay, and with that we are basically ready for the lineup. Now, let's quickly configure our panels for the takeoff. This is up to you how you like it. What I personally like to have is the map, and you can either use the full screen map, or you could split this and for example have half a map over here and half a chart over here with your checklist available over here. Maybe useful setting to do. How do you do that? Well, go to half, then select the cursor to the other window, and then you may want to select charts, departure, Teterboro 4. And like that we could have our initial climb up there. Just choose something to your liking. Whatever works best for you is what you are going to use. So, for the purpose of the tutorial, this is what we are going to use today. So we got our ND over there, and then we got our chart over there, and we got our checklist over here. Okay, so with all of those selections done, let's go ahead and line up on the runway. And for that we got the shortly before takeoff part of the checklist, which is transponder set. Again, if you were using, for example, manual altitude control down there, then this is something that you might have to do. And change back to auto mode. TCAS as required, it's fully automatic. Passengers advice and lights. Let's turn the landing lights up. And that's it. And with that, the before takeoff checklist is complete, so the after takeoff checklist is next. And then we can line ourselves up on runway 06 and prepare our aircraft for the takeoff. Now, while we do that, down here is our flight timer. We want to use that one to track our flight time. But how do you control it? Down there on the GTCs, you go to Utilities, and then Timer. And that is where you can set your timing.
Runway 06.
That's checked.
1,700 meters remaining.
Alright, that is checked. Now, we are basically ready for our departure. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the theory of the takeoff before we take off, because things are gonna go very quickly. So, theory. Thrust levers into the toga notch, which is a little hard to find, so in practice I just put them all the way forward, then we see toga ATR, and then just pull it back a little bit until we see takeoff again. That gives us full takeoff thrust. The plane accelerates rapidly, and the plane pitches rather quickly. So you want to pull, and once the nose starts coming off, just relax the control column a little bit, and then pitch to about 12.5 to 15 degrees. With that, you're immediately going to start accelerating, and you will rapidly approach the flap limit speed, which is 180 knots. So the way this is done on a business jet, a little different for you airline jockeys out there, is that once you're past the FS speed, you can retract the flaps. So basically, airborne, gear up, and when you're above 126 knots and at a certain safe altitude, which is 200, 300 feet-ish, retract the flaps. Otherwise, you're quickly gonna run into an overspeed situation. Well, once in the air, we're gonna engage the yaw damper. Respectively, for the purpose of the tutorial, we'll simply put the autopilot on. Okay, follow the SID, for which we got FMS mode active, and we'll handle all the rest when we're actually in the air. So, prepare for things to go very quickly over here. So, it does take a couple takeoffs to really get on top of the airplane there. If you have a low level of altitude, prepare to pull the thrust off very quickly after you are at a safe altitude. Alright then, let's go ahead and commence the takeoff. I'm going to start the timing down here. Release the brakes, and then slowly increase the throttles until we have full takeoff thrust. So, thrust set, speed is coming up. Past 80 knots, V1 rotates. Get about 12.5, 15 degrees, positive rate, gear up, and flaps up. Alright, we are reaching 400. Let's start the left-hand turn. And you can see the flaps are up. 210 is our first speed. Passing 1,000, set climb thrust. And here we go. Alright, now let's select level change, autopilot. And with that, our airplane is now in charge of things. Look at the rate of climb here. 6,000 is completely normal. Alright, now we're climbing. Let's do the after takeoff climb checklist down to the line. So landing gear lever is up. Then the flaps are at 0, thrust levers in climb. This is important because the plane just has power. Just look at that, we're accelerating 4,500 feet a minute. Now we're at 250 knots, 6,000 feet a minute. Completely normal. Alright, so auto throttle not installed, speed selector knob. We are going to keep it on FMS. Altimeter set and cross check. Since we're in the US, we only need to reset them at 18,000. So I got a bit of time there, but we cross-checked them on the current local QNH. And lastly, yaw damper on, which we can verify up here, and is on. Alright, and that's the checklist complete down at 10,000 feet. Now we're on the 280 heading as per the SID. Let's go ahead and quickly fly direct to the first waypoint. So we're going to go onto the flight plan, pick the waypoint in question, so Gayel in our case, then we just hit direct over here, activate direct Gayel, and since we're already in FMS nav mode, which is nav with FMS source selected, the plane is now following that route. And that's about as easy as it gets. So, we are still in the clouds, so I am going to keep the fasten seatbelt on for the time being, but let's read the second half of the checklist. So above 10,000 feet, we got seatbelt sign as needed, we keep it on for the time being. External lights are gonna stay on till 18,000. Weather radar, if installed, as required. Now this is a thing that we are gonna talk about in a couple of moments. For now we'll just take it off. Airspeed as required, we have that, and windshield heat switches as required, and that's the after takeoff climb checklist complete. Next up we have the descent checklist, which we don't need just yet. So let's switch our PFD to the full screen mode by going to PFD settings, PFD mode full screen. You can activate the traffic inset, which I find very useful to see what may be going on around you. So let's go ahead and have that active. Alright, and with that, we're up at altitude and we're climbing out. We're climbing a flight level 410 today, so let's go ahead and set that. And with that, we are nicely established in the climb. Now we're approaching the transition altitude, which is 18,000. So once we're reaching that, we can set the altimeter standard just by pushing the barrel knobs. So push that one, push that one, and then you have the standard knob up here. And with that, our altimeters are set to standard and cross-check passing flight level 180 now. Okay, and with that, we are now nicely established in the climb. So, in order to maintain a little bit of flight deck hygiene, it's always a good idea to synchronize the heading knob, which you can do simply by pressing the heading button. So, just pressing heading button in, that always synchronizes the heading knob. Then let's talk about anti-ice usage. So with a TAT of plus 10 degrees or less and visible moisture, such as the clouds that we have ahead of us, why do we get a TCAS array now? That's nonsense, we're easily gonna outclimb this guy. But if it's already happening, you can see we got the green area here, which we're in, and you also have the green area here.
Level off.
No, we've outclimbed him. We're not gonna level off. That's an incorrect command right now. Thank you. No, bye-bye. Remove traffic. But, you just heard it, the plane tells you where the traffic is, which is a very nice feature. Alright, now, we were about to talk about anti-ice. Down here, windshield heat, used when the windscreens fogs up. Then we have engine anti-ice, which we're going to turn on right now, and we can see that we get the message up there. Now, let's take a moment to talk about the correct usage of anti-ice in different situations in your climb. So the manual has a very nice explanation. Currently it's on page 37, but it may the manual may still be adjusted a little bit, so have a look into it. It's great. Okay, so under which situations do you need to use which anti-ice settings? You have a little table in the manual. So on the ground, with the temperature between 5 to 10 degrees Celsius and visible moisture, engine 1 and 2 anti-ice on, wing and stabilizer anti-ice off, windshield heat off. On the ground, with the temperature below plus 5 degrees and visible moisture, engine and wing stabilizer and windshield heat on. In flight, with a temperature between 5 to 10 degrees and visible moisture, engine anti-ice on, wing stabilizer anti-ice off, windshield heat as required. And in flight with a TAT below plus 5 degrees and visible moisture, all anti-ice systems on. And after leaving icing, with all ice removed from the airplane, and this is basically the situation we're in right now. So we should have been here like this, with everything on. And now that we've left the icing, and since the temperature has been below plus 5, we're gonna do as follows. Wing stabilizer off, and then you got the ice speed reset down there. And we are gonna do that. So hold that, and that's going to reset the minimum speed that the computer calculates up there. So whenever you turn the anti-ice on, your airplane assumes that you are picking up ice, which increases the weight of the aircraft. So you may have ice, you know, for example, on the surface over here, or on the front over here, which you cannot remove using your anti-icing systems. Therefore, the minimum speed is increased, and that's why you need to use the ice speed reset on the wing step switch after all ice has been removed. Then you can turn the rest of the ice protection systems off. I can absolutely recommend to read that part of the manual, as it is something a little bit unique on the Phenom that you may not be used to from your other aircraft. So, in all parts of the world when passing 10,000, and in the US when passing 18,000, landing and taxi lights off, inspection light off, and then when no turbulence is required, you can release the passengers down there. Let's turn the seatbelt signs off. Now, FSReborn simulates the well-being of your passengers. So what I can recommend when you go down here onto that page is that you can, for example, serve them a little coffee or little snacks, keep the cabin temperature under control, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, passengers may not be too happy. That way you can increase their happiness. So let's give them a bit of coffee, let's give them something to eat back here. And that's all visually simulated. That way you can keep them a little happier. And notice that the passengers are manually operating the window blinds here. Some fairly nice stuff. Okay, so we are now in the climb, and as we are doing that, basically every 10,000 feet in the climb, we should have a quick look at the cabin pressurization panel. We want to make sure that the cabin rate is climbing at a good rate, and that the differential pressure is increasing. But if the cabin is not climbing fast enough, then at some point you may exceed certain limits, which may result, for example, in a differential pressure sensor failure and that kind of stuff. So just be a little careful there with the cabin altitude. Always have a good look and ensure that the cabin altitude is following appropriately. If the cabin rate of climb is stuck down at 200-250 feet a minute, that indicates that you are not pressurizing the aircraft, but that it only bleeds a little bit of air and increases naturally. Most likely source, the ECS switch is not on both. So that's something that you always want to have an eye on as you are climbing. Now you can see that we have already automatically converted on a Mach 0.65 climb, which again is what we had selected down here on the VNAV page. Remember, climb schedule 250 Mach 65 in automatic mode, respectively with the speed knob and FMS. That thing is just going to fly that all automatically now, and just following the target Mach number. About as easy as it gets. Now you can see we still have huge rates of climbs over here, going through flight level 370, 3,000 feet a minute. The reason the plane is so overpowered is because it has the ability to fly to flight level 450. You can easily do that and actually go up to flight level 450. And it still needs to have a little bit of reserve power when you are up there. Also, we are flying rather slow at the moment. 6.5 is a good speed for a climb, but you'll notice that with the engines at maximum thrust, once we're reaching cruise altitude, you're only about going to get to Mach 0.77, Mach 7.8-ish. You're not going to be able to overspeed the aircraft if you just leave the power in maximum. That's why it has such a high rated climb over here when you're flying at a lower speed. As we're approaching the target altitude and approaching 1000 go, let's go to vertical speed mode here and select VS 1000, and then we are going to level off in our target altitude. A small word here because of the huge rate of climb that this airplane can give you. When you are in the lower altitudes, be very, very mindful of other traffic around you that you may find on your TCAS. When ATC clears you to an altitude where you do not have a continuous climb like we did right now, always limit your rate of climb to something sensible. So 3,000 feet to go, maximum 3,000 feet a minute. 2,000 feet to go to the target altitude, maximum 2,000 feet a minute. 1,000, 1,000. And you may even limit this further, extending it to 4,000, 4,000, 5,000, 5,000 when you're operating in the low altitudes, so that you do not cause any TCAS conflicts with other aircraft. Alright, we're now leveling off at our cruising altitude, and that means we can accelerate to our cruising speed, and once we have done that, take manual control of our cruising speed. Now remember, the airplane does not have auto throttle. However, it doesn't need an auto throttle either, because it just doesn't have the power to overpower or to overspeed it. Now, my personal recommendation, leave the engines in climb thrust until you're reaching your cruise speed. That way it simply accelerates a little bit further. And once you are reaching your cruise speed, just pull your thrust levers back until the climb limit changes in a cruise limit. So you can see we're about approaching the target Mach number right now. I'm just pulling my throttles back a little bit. And here you can see it changed from climb to cruise. And now it's setting maximum cruise power. And that will be the power you need at high altitudes to maintain roughly Mach 7.7 or Mach 7.8, depending on the weather conditions and your weight. And that's it. It may sound, let's say, it may sound like a complex task to maintain a cruising speed manually without auto throttle, but it really isn't. As you can see, it's now stabilizing on Mach 0.77 under the current weather conditions, and that's it. That's as easy as it gets. Now let's prepare our airplane for a proper cruising configuration. For that I want the GTC to control my map over here. Let's go to full screen map and set an appropriate range, and that's it. Now, reaching a cruising altitude, we always do want to conduct fuel tracks. So let's go down here, find the top of climb. Should have taken 18 minutes to get here. It did take us 14 minutes because we got continuous climbs. Lovely. And we should have 1,610 pounds of fuel minimum. We do have 2,065 because we originally loaded a little bit more. So that's fantastic. And you can check the fuel used. You can check the fuel used by simply subtracting what you have from what you had originally loaded. Alright, and that's it. Now, rapid cruise level, and we can start our descent preparation as the top of descent is already coming up. So, how can you see the top of descent? Personally, I recommend using the inset window on the nav map. You can do this by going into the map settings, and then you take the inset window and you activate that one, flight plan text. So your map may look like this. Activate flight plan text, then you get all this information up here. And this one tells you your time to the top of descent, which is currently 10 minutes. This is always based on the plane that it thinks it's cruising at. Respectively, if we had a lower level of, for example, if ATC gave us an immediate or an intermediate level off at level 300, then it would assume that to be our cruising altitude, since we do not enter the cruise altitude down here in the VNAV page, so it just takes whatever it has. So once you reach the top of climb, it's going to take that as cruise altitude, and then it's going to calculate your top of descent. The top of descent is based on a simple flight path angle management. So VNAV is a very simplistic system, which it is on most business jets, because if you went to idle thrust, right here, it would pitch down to something like minus 15 degrees. That would not be comfortable for the passengers. Therefore, you're descending with thrust on in most business jets. And the same is the case for the Phenom at high altitudes. We'll be talking about that in a little more detail when we get down to lower altitudes. For the time being, what's important is to understand how the VNAV profile is calculated, and that's quite easy. You got the FPA target, which by default is minus 3. You can change that on the flight plan page. So down here you can see we got the flight plan, and you got VNAV, descent, and down here you got your descent schedule, and we can see it's 310 knots, Mach 0.78, and then a 3-degree profile. You could change this to anything else that you want, so you could do a 2-degree profile if you want a little less pitch down, whatever suits you best. But the thing that I want you to understand here is that it is going to use that simple rule, 3-degree descent, and then it's going to follow all the altitude restrictions, and that's how the VNAV path is calculated. It shows you the target vertical speed, so 2,372 feet a minute over here, purely based on flying a 3-degree profile and the current ground speed. Once we are in the actual descent, a little more information is going to come up down here, which we are going to talk about later. But let's first of all talk about the actual descent preparation. So we start by verifying that the procedures we had selected earlier are still current. So what I recommend to do here is to get your destination weather. You can either use the EFB for that, or you can use the performance, landing data, weather page for that. Show meta. Down here you can get your weather as well. So you got 050 at 4 at the moment, so might have a slight tailwind on approach, or we could change to runway 06. Both are possible at the moment, completely up to us what we want to do. I would say we're going to change runway 06 right for our landing. So let's go down home, procedures, and now we start selecting that. Let's start on the arrival. Carter 5 arrival, P-Berg transition is still correct, but we can change the runway 06 right. Now let's select a preview, show on the map, and this is what the arrival looks like now. Then we can have a quick look at the chart to see whether that is grossly correct or incorrect. So let's just go up here, and we can see from 06 that looks pretty much correct. Okay, so let's go out of that and press load. Then let's go on to procedure again and select the approach. And this time it's going to be an ILS approach, runway 06 right, with a vector transition, and that's that approach. Now let's go to preview, show that on the map, and again, that's what it looks like. This approach looks, yeah, like that to Vefsu and then into a holding over there. Looks okay. Alright, down here you could already enter the minimums if you have the chart ready. If you don't have the chart ready yet, that is not a problem. Just load the approach. Okay. And with that, our route is already fully loaded. Now, you can, and I kind of recommend doing that, you can simply use your nav display to verify whatever you got in the route. For that, with the map selected to nav, use the button down here and press it, which is going to activate the cursor. And now using the touchpad, you can simply move your cursor around to check whatever you got. And you can see that we actually have a problem over here. So after P-Berg, there is just nothing in there anymore. That is a bug that the product has right now. Just go to procedures, reload the arrival, like that. So that's the entire arrival. Let's just press remove, yes, and then we just enter load again, and now we should have gotten it back. So here it is. Let's fly direct to P-Berg, like that, and now the entire arrival is back in. We got our top of descent back, and so on. In order to see a top of descent over here, it needs some sort of an end of descent altitude. Normally, that could be any constraint that we have over here, or that could be any constraint on the approach, but it needs some constraint and an angle. So if you don't get a top of descent, then simply enter a constraint manually and a flight path angle, and then you're getting a top of descent. That's about as easy as it is. So we now have the entire approach in here. Let's go ahead and cross-check that the star is actually correct. So let's go to Home, Charts, select our destination, Charlie, Yankee, Uniform, Lee. What the? I think that was a wind shift. Something messed up with our weather. Let's disregard that for the time. Okay, so we got Montreal for the charts down here. Then we can select arrival. It may take a short while to load those charts. Normally should be a bit faster than it is right now. Let's try that again. Alright, Montreal, here we are. Arrival, Carter 5 arrival. If you want to change between day and night charts, you can do that on the chart options. Light mode, day, here we go. Like that. Okay, now let's go ahead and cross-check that arrival. So we go back to the flight plan. What the hell is the wind doing? Well, it's gonna resume whatever it had, so that's fine. Okay, so chart, Carter 5, and what the hell? I said Carter 5, nothing else. Alright, here we go. So, that way, let's go ahead and have a look into that chart and verify that our flight plan matches what we have on the chart. So, we start at Peeberg, that's correct. Then we got LATs, and that's above flight level 110, respectively above 11,000, and we got that. Then we continued to APDOT, below 11,000, and we got APDOT below 11,000. And that is also what it bases the 3 degrees on right now. Then we are going to continue. What is it doing with the weather? No comment. Okay, so then we continue towards Dunab, and for runway 06 left right, that's maximum 220, below 9,000. And going down here, we got Dunab, below 9,000, maximum 220. You can see that it changed the angle over there. That's because it wants to go from APDOT directly to the 9,000 at Dunab. And that's 2.76 degrees, so that's what it's calculating down there. Then we continue towards Rockty, which we got. And then to left on a Paclow, maximum 210, below 4,000. We got Paclow below 4,000, maximum 210. And then towards Tapka, maximum 210, between 3 and 4,000, which we got down here as well. And then Mach 2, and then we just continue on the outbound heading, which is exactly what we got down here. From there we are going to continue on to the approach, so let's go ahead and get the ILS chart. So approach ILS 06 right. You just heard it say vertical track. That's the alert that we only have 1 minute to our top of descent. So on the ILS chart we start at Fluffo, and then we start the descent. We got Omtal. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. So that's Fluffo, and this one goes directly to NASC over here, 1520, and we got NASC above 1520, 3 degree glide. That looks completely correct. I'm going to pause this here quickly for a second, just so that we can finish the approach preparation before going into the descent. So that way we've checked our approach. The missed approach straight out to 3000, then right turn heading 192, intercept Montreal VOR outbound to Vefsu, and we can see we got straight out heading 057 to 3000, 192 to intercept Vefsu, climbing to 3000, and that's exactly what we got on the approach chart. Then we have our minimums down here, 305, and this is a category Bravo aircraft. So if you have several different minima, always take the Cat Bravo minima. Today we only have a single one, so let's go to home. Then we got utilities, minimum, and down there we can enter 305, like that, enter, and that's it. Now we got our minimum shown up there. Alright, the ILS frequency is tuned automatically. You can verify that on the radio page down there, 110.5 and 110.5, and the rest is basically automatic. The one thing that we have left to do is to calculate our landing speeds, which we're going to do on the performance page. Landing data. Now we have Montreal 06 right, at a landing weight of 14,245 pounds calculated. Weather, we simply load the metadata and set the runway condition. Then you go to runway, just verify everything you got over there, and then landing configuration. There are 2 approved landing configurations for this aircraft, either flaps 3 or flaps full. Now 3 is totally acceptable. Full can be used when you have a shorter runway. Now we are going to use full just for demonstrational purposes today, but you might just as well select flaps 3. Ice protection as needed. Delta V approach, that's basically your personal safety factor. I would always add at least 5 knots or the wind correction for that one. And then the landing factor is something that's by default set to automatic. I've already changed my defaults over there to default flaps full and landing factor 1.25. That's why these figures have shown up over there. So I've changed my defaults. You can always use it to your liking. Completely up to you. I would always include a little landing factor over there, like 1.25. That way it calculates 25% longer landing run. If you go down here to the landing data page, you can accept the landing speed. And then you can see we got 9,602 feet of runway available. We need 3,180. And that is already factored with that 1.25 factor that I've included on the previous page. Alright, that way we now also have our landing speeds in and set down there, and with that we've basically completed the approach preparation for the Phenom. So that's about as easy as it gets. What the hell is it doing? Why are we at... no comment. Absolutely no comment. I would have loved to show you how to intercept the vertical profile correctly. Now... What the... The weather simulation is completely fucked up right now.
High speed.
Okay, look at that.
High speed. High speed. High speed. High speed. High speed.
Something's completely broken here. I apologize, guys. In any case, we've got to start our descent. And I am just going to turn that weather off for the time being. So high speed's checked, let's correct that. I'm gonna use the speed brake real quick to get rid of that speed.
High speed. High speed. High speed.
Okay, it's not extending the speed brake, that's fine. So, the vertical profile is coming in over there by turning the altitude selector down and activating VNAV. It should intercept the path, but if you're already above the path, then you gotta use a mode like vertical speed in order to intercept the path. Guys, I do apologize. I would have loved to show you that a little bit better, but the Flight Simulator's weather engine just completely fucked this up. That way we're now chasing the path. Normally, the way that you intercept the vertical or the descent is quite easy. A minute before you reach the top of descent, it's going to show you, or it's going to give you the oral alert that you're approaching the vertical track, as you have heard it. Then what you do is you ask ATC for descent, you set the lower altitude and arm VNAV, which is going to give you that little V over there. And then when the path comes in and meets your current altitude, then it's transitioning into VNAV path mode, which we will see here in a moment, as we are approaching and intercepting the path. Here we go, now we got VNAV path, and now it's tracking it. Remember, you have manual thrust. Do not pull the thrust to idle from cruise level. That's not gonna work. It is really just not gonna work. Instead, just reduce the thrust gradually in order to maintain the speed. With a jet aircraft, you're basically always looking at changing the speeds in the, or you're at changing the N1 in a region of approximately a couple percent. So for the initial start of the descent, pull it off maybe 20% N1, and then when you're changing the speed target, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just changing it a couple percent in order to control the speed accurately. And that way it's really easy to control your speed. A very forgiving plane for that. Now, we are on the way down, and the most important page that we have while we're descending is the VNAV profile down there. Again, for that one, map settings, inset window, turn on flight plan text. And that way you get that page down here. So, what type of information do you have there? Time to bottom of descent, 14 minutes. That's basically the time until we reach this. Then we got a 3-degree flight path angle, and the target vertical speed is 2,200 feet a minute, based on your ground speed and the flight path angle. The vertical speed required is what you need from the present position to make that target. So right now we need 2,218 feet, because we're exactly on the path. We can see that right down below, vertical deviation, so deviation from the optimal path, 24 feet low. Let me show you what happens if we just go a little lower, just for demonstrational purposes. We'll turn VNAV off, just give it a bit higher rate of descent right now, and just get ourselves a little bit below the path, like this. Now, we got, you can see we're 500 below the profile, and in order to reach the target vertical speed exactly there, we need 2,100 feet a minute. So that way, if ATC keeps you off your route, you could use that. Now we need 2050 feet a minute. Could use that in order to make a nice continuous descent down to whatever target you may want. Alright, if you want to re-intercept the path, simply select an appropriate rate of descent, like here, 1000 feet a minute, VNAV. So you see that little V, and path is shown in white, and that way, as soon as we reach that target, we are going to intercept the path. You can find these types of information up here as well. Got your vertical path deviation, and you can see 500 feet is 1 dot. And then you got the target vertical speed down there as well. So that way you have everything right in front of you on the screens. Pretty useful. Alright, let's return our PFD to the split setting. So PFD, mode, split. And that way we got our descent checklist over there, which we can now execute. Let's just continue that descent here down to, let's say, level 210. Okay. So let's go ahead and run the descent checklist. That is windshield 1 and 2 switches on. So the reason we turn the windshield on in the descent is because our windows would be pretty darn cold, because we've been flying in a very cold environment. When we are descending into a lower altitude, the windshield is still cold, but the air is a lot more moist, and therefore the windows may quickly freeze up. That's the reason the checklist asks us to put the windshield 1 and 2 switches on right now. Okay, pressurization, check landing field elevation. That's down here, and that is checked. Then landing speeds set, and for that we verify that we've set our speeds over here for the landing. And once again, if the speeds have to be set in sequence or automatically. Alright, and that's the checklist complete down to 10,000 feet. Alright, and with that we are now nicely descending. So you can see my speed has been varying a little as I have varied my vertical speed there. But overall, look at my N1 right now as I'm re-intercepting that speed. You can see I'm not doing great changes here. Obviously the wind is messing us around a little bit right now. But you can see that now that we're reaching the target, I'm just pulling the N1 off a tiny little bit. And that way you can very easily manage your airspeed in a jet without having to worry about any fancy stuff. It is really that easy. Alright, now let's try and put that weather back on again. Throws us a little out of the path, but we'll re-intercept it. Where are we? 3,000. What's wrong? Man, the weather engine's really effed up right now. Okay, anyway. Now on the descent, and let's once again talk about the setup of our G3000. Something that I would personally like is to have my chart on the left and then have the large display available here. The reason I want the large display is because, as you can see on our FO side, the compact display does not give you the VNAV profile information. Now, you can access that through alternate sources. So, that's located in... gotta find that myself, down here on the performance info somewhere. Did I mess that up right now? Utilities... Well, there is VNAV information available somewhere down here, even though I can't find it right now. Alright, so let's continue our descent down to a sensible altitude. And now that we're cleared down to an altitude, we can set our QNH. So this is once again pretty easy, and you just go down to the performance, landing data. Down here you can get your weather, show METAR. You can see we got a QNH of 3040 down in Montreal now. You can pre-select that up here for both the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring side. So when you listen to your ATIS, That way you can pre-select it, and then once you're cleared down to that particular altitude, simply set your QNH. You will notice that VNAV can be rather jumpy when you do that, so in order to smooth all of that out for your passengers, it may be an idea to go to vertical speed mode before you set the QNH, but that's personal technique, all the way up to you. Eventually your passengers are going to give you enough feedback that you're going to do it yourself anyway. Alright, so QNH 3040 is set, and with that we are now nicely on our way down and below the transition level. Now let's go ahead and have a little look into how our VNAV system works to understand what exactly the airplane is doing. So, as I mentioned earlier, we got full automatic speed control from VNAV in terms of what it targets. We do not have auto throttle. We need to do that ourselves, but believe me, it's not that difficult once you get the hang of it. Just do small corrections all the time, and don't just put the pedal to the metal, but just do small corrections, and then it's easy. Now, the target speed is based on what we've entered on the VNAV page in our flight plan. So here's the VNAV information that we've been looking for on the profile page in the VNAV profile. Alright, so if you are using a compact display, pull up that page, gives you useful info. Now, the speed target is based on this, on the descent speed schedule, and then you have the altitude speed limit 250 below 10,000 and the terminal area speed limit, just like what we have talked about earlier. Now, your speed buck is going to follow exactly that, so Mach 7.8 until we transition into 310 knots, and that's that. However, what it is not going to do is to allow for a deceleration segment in the descent. So we'll see that on our arrival. If you have a look into the flight plan, you can see that at Dunab we have a 220 knot speed restriction. So once we're reaching Dunab, you'll see the target speed is going to go down towards 220, but the plane is just going to continue a 3-degree descent. The reason it's made like that is because when you pull your thrust levers all the way to idle, the plane has so much drag that you can decelerate on a 3-degree descent path when you're at high speeds. When you're at low speeds, so I'm talking 200, 220-ish, then you will not lose any speed on a 3-degree profile at all. So that's rather important to keep in mind. When you're at high speed, you have all the drag you want, but when you're at low speed, you will be using either the landing gear or the speed brakes a lot. We'll be talking about energy management a bit more on the approach. So, target speed is switched to 250. The reason it's done that at this high altitude is because we have to slow down. Now let me put into practice what I've just explained to you. I'm going to pull those engines to idle. You can see right now, even though we're descending at 1,800 feet a minute, it's got a lot of drag and is decelerating quite rapidly. Let's use that moment to tidy up the cabin. Remember, they're still... Oh, they finished eating and drinking. Okay, that's good. Then let's just select clean the cabin down there. Okay, so you can see now that we're approaching 250, we're already decelerating quite a bit slower than we used to be earlier. Now let's use a little bit of thrust there. And here we go, nicely established at 250 knots. And now we are just getting down here. Now, once we're in Duna, you'll see the speed target change to 220. And that's where we have to start thinking about how we are going to lose speed. The airplane has huge speed brakes. If you look at the top of the wing, those large panels over there, thank you camera, those large panels over there are your speed brakes. You cannot control them gradually like you can in your favorite airliner. It's just an in and out switch located right down here. You want to avoid using the speed brake as much as possible because the speed brakes are super effective. But that also means that they are rather uncomfortable for the passengers. So you want to be a little bit careful there. We're going through 10,000, so let's go ahead and turn on the landing lights. Let's turn on the fasten seatbelt sign. And at night you can use the inspection light. It's basically the same as your wing light, so may or may not be using it. Now, since we are below 10,000, we can run the last part of the descent checklist, which is below 10,000 foot, fasten seatbelt signs on, which we just did, and that's the descent checklist complete. Next is going to be the approach checklist, which we can run as soon as we're below 10,000 and on the local QNH. So let's go ahead and do the approach checklist now, which is external lights as required, as just mentioned, landing lights, nav lights, strobe lights, inspection lights, not really. Are set, then the passengers are advised, transfeed knob, that your fuel transfeed over there is off. Altimeters, QNH 3040, and that's set 3 times. And then the windshield 1 and 2 switches as required. Now, since our windshields are pretty warm right now, we can go ahead and turn them back off again, like this. The advantage of turning the windshield heat switches off is that your airplane is going to give you an indication of when icing happens, because you'll just see it happen on the windshield. Okay, so the windshield 1, 2 switches are off. That's the approach checklist complete. Next is going to be the before landing checklist, and that's it. Alright, so we are reaching DUNAP, and you can see the target speed has decreased to 220. Now let's put our engines in idle and see what's going to happen. Let's also descend down to 4,000. Like this. Okay, so you can see the plane doesn't stop the descent, and now we're running the danger of being too fast at DUNAP. Still decelerating okay right now. Personally, a couple knots. If it's on the right trend, not too much of a problem, but everyone will be thinking a little different there. So we're decelerating towards 220, and then we can maintain that. If you needed to decelerate really quickly, speed brakes are an option. Now, on the approach, things will be looking a little bit different. When you're down at the approach speeds and descending on a 3-degree glide slope, your airplane is going to give you roughly 190 knots. It's not going to get any slower than that with the engines in idle. But here's the problem. The flap speed limit is 180 knots. So what can you do? 2 things. Either use the speed brake, which again is rather uncomfortable, or just use the landing gear, because the maximum landing gear extension speed is 250 knots. Up to you to decide which one you may want to use. So let's go ahead and have a little look into the approach. There's 2 ways that the approach could possibly be flown, and I'm just talking about the ILS approach over here. I am not talking about RNAV approaches that will receive their separate dedicated tutorial. So for the ILS approach, there's 2 ways. Either you are going to be directed straight to the final in FMS mode, so basically following the star. When that happens, you will see that eventually your localizer is going to appear on the HSI in a dashed matter, and the glide slope may appear on the VNAV scale in a dashed matter, respectively in white. When that happens and you're cleared for the approach, simply press the approach knob, and then your localizer and glide slope modes will arm, and the airplane is just going to fly down and intercept them from FMS and VNAV mode straight into approach mode. That's what you can do when there is an intercept from the star down right onto the ILS. If there is not, so if you are in a downwind on your star, like we are right now, and you're receiving radar vectors, then we are going to do something that's a little bit different that I'm going to show you in a moment. First of all, let's go down to 3,000 feet, because that is what the approach starts from. So I'm just going to turn VNAV off over here, go to vertical speed mode, that's 1,000 to go. And let's say that ATC is now going to vector us down onto the approach. So, to a right and turn here, heading 330, like that. So we're now receiving radar vectors. We go down into the procedures page and then activate vectors to final. By doing that, your center line is extended from the final approach fix. Your localizer is automatically tuned and set active. And the course is automatically selected. What the airplane is not doing is to change the target speed. That is something that you have to take care of manually.
Gear.
No, we don't need the gear.
Gear.
So tell me guys, showing 3000, we're in 600 AGL. What the fuck? Okay, I'm gonna switch that live weather off. Okay, clear skies. This is just fucked up. Let's just go to slew mode here and bring ourselves back up to 3000. Simulator's weather engine just completely fucked this up, guys. Sorry. Okay, here we go. 3000 on the approach. So let's say we're getting a vector to intercept the final now. Here we go, heading 030, cleared for the approach. Let's press the approach button. Localizer and glide slope are armed. We are coming in. We are within 10 knots from the airfield now. Target speed is 200 from our VNAV system as planned. Okay, and now there's two things we can do. Yeah, let's give it 2992 because we've just changed our profile. Here we go. And then just maintain those 2600. Not the fine way of doing this, but you can see now we got different altimeter settings on each side. So that's why we're getting the baro miscompare. Here we go, 2992. So localizer is coming in, localizer mode is capturing. My personal recommendation, if ATC lets you, just slow the airplane down to something about 170 or 160 and intercept the final with that. If ATC commands a fast approach, then you got to fly it. There's no way around it. You can do it slow, you can do it fast, both are going to work. If you do it slow, things are easy. So I'm just going to accelerate again and I'm going to show you fast in this tutorial. So runway heading is set. Let's intercept the glider at 200 over here, just for the fun of it. So here we are, 200 knots, the glide slope is coming alive. ATC does still not allow you to slow down and they demand 180 knots until, let's say, 5 miles on the final. Or a minimum of 180 until 5 miles. We're intercepting the glide slope here at 200 knots. We cannot extend the flaps because we're simply too fast. So, what you do in this situation is simply go gear down. You can see, on a 3-degree glide, in idle, it's just maintaining the speed. It's not losing anything. And the go-around altitude is set upon glide slope capture. So let's go gear down. And that's going to give you all the drag you need. So, from an airliner's perspective, you may be used to flying a little faster, or to a slightly different configuration sequence. Airliner, you're used to extending flaps first. On the business jet, that is not always the case. You may have to use the gear first. Once you're below 180, you can go flaps 1, like this. And then you can go flaps 3 straight away. So from flaps 1 to flaps 3. 2 and 3 are basically the same setting. 2 tells the GPWS that you are on departure. 3 tells the GPWS that you're on approach. But it's the same actual flap setting. And then you can go flaps full once you are down at below 160 knots. For the approach, 112 knots is our approach speed. That's what we're gonna fly down there, regardless of what the speed box says. Okay, and here we go. Nicely established. Through the 1000 foot gate we are completely stabilized. So on pitch, on localizer, on glide slope, landing configuration established, and landing checklist complete, which is just yaw damper off, gear down, flaps down, airspeed VREF. Okay, here we are. So let's turn the autopilot off, and let's also turn the flight director off, otherwise you may get a flight director caution on the short final. So let's talk about how to execute the touchdown. You have radio callouts until 100 feet, thereafter you do not have radio altimeter callouts. So you will have to judge your height by the look outside, or you just glimpse at the PFD radio altimeter, up to you. At 50 feet, engines idle, and then just fly the airplane onto the ground. The landing gear is very narrow. So down here, the gears are very close to one another. Therefore, the plane has a tendency to start yawing to the side and banking on the ground. So be careful with that and hold your wings level on the landing and maintain directional control. So idle at 50, start the flare, and manually fly down, otherwise it's gonna flare across the entire runway. Okay, minimum continue. So over the threshold, that's about 60-50 feet, thrust idle, keep flying it down, flare it, and touchdown. You don't have reverses, so you simply either let the plane roll out. I'm not using any brakes right now, as you can see it decelerates fairly well. You can use the brakes if you're on a short runway as needed. And with that, welcome to Montreal. Now we're going to vacate off to the right, that's where the general aviation is parking. So we'll just let her roll a little bit. Obviously you would have to ask ATC for permission for that, if you don't use minimum runway occupancy time, which is something to think about in this airplane. Alright, there comes taxiway, then we are going to vacate off to the right hand side. So a little bit of brakes here, and here we go, off to the right. And here we are. So, get the entire airplane off the runway and behind the hold short line. And only once the entire airplane is off, you can stop for your after landing procedures. In the real world, you kinda want to try and keep the plane rolling if ATC and your clearance allow. Okay, so let's go for the after landing checklist. Flaps 0. Then we got lights as required. So landing light and taxi. Keep the strobe light on. Remember, it also acts as a beacon in the Phenom. Okay, transponder as needed. In auto mode, no problem, but remember, auto mode for VATSIM may turn your mode Charlie off, so you might have to switch your altitude reporting. Just something to keep in mind there for VATSIM operations, and TCAS is automated, so no problem here. And that's the after landing checklist complete. Alright then, let's go ahead and taxi to our parking position. And if you're keen on writing your logbook, you may want to stop the timer at this point here. So that's home, utilities, timer, stop. Just something you may or may not want to do. Alright, and then let's taxi to the parking position. I'm just going to go straight ahead here and take pretty much the first position available. fairly easy. The taxi dynamics of the plane are the same for departure and after landing, other than, for example, a wide-body aircraft which has a significant weight difference. On Phenom it's insignificant. Let's just take the first parking position over here. Yeah, just off to the right-hand side, like that. Alright, and here we are. So, let's go for the shutdown checklist. And again, this is a simple read and do checklist. So, thrust levers idle, emergency parking brake apply, windshield heat switches off, ADS probe knob auto, so that one remains on, respectively on auto. Engine 1 and 2 switches off, that's the ice protection, that's not the shutdown yet. Wing stabilizer switch off, off. Now start stop knobs, stop. This is where you shut down the engines. And then we got MFD status page check, so let's just bring the cursor over here. And aircraft systems status. Over here you're basically looking at everything being fine, so still sufficient oxygen, you check the brake pressure that you have over there, you check the battery voltages, that type of stuff. And then fasten seatbelt signs off, like this, and that's the shutdown checklist complete. So let's go ahead and secure the aircraft straight away as well. So leaving airplane checklist, IFE refreshment switch off down here. Then you got oxygen bottle valve cutout, so you pull that one up. Emergency light switch off, off. Also put the strobe lights off at this point once the engines are securely shut down. And then battery 1 and 2 off, like this.
GPWS, system failure.
Okay, and that's it. Note that you leave all the switches that we turned on in the pre-flight, you simply leave them on, respectively on auto. And that's it. With that, welcome to Montreal, and that's the completion of our tutorial. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I do hope that you enjoyed this one. Leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. If you do have any questions, then do put them there. I'm going to produce an RF approach tutorial very soon, but that's it for our flight. So thank you very much, everyone. As always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below.